The evening sun cast long shadows across Highway 47 as Officer Danny Cole noticed the sleek black vehicle cruising slightly above the speed limit. Nothing unusual, just another routine stop on a quiet Thursday evening outside Portland. He signaled his partner Lisa Green, and they pulled out from their spot behind the old gas station. The black car slowed immediately and pulled over without any fuss. Danny felt relaxed as he approached, his hand resting casually on his belt. He had done this 1,000 times before. The driver stepped out when Danny signaled her to do so. She was a black woman in her early 30s, wearing simple jeans and a leather jacket that looked expensive but not flashy. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she moved with an unusual calmness that Danny noticed right away. Most people were nervous during traffic stops, fidgeting with their phones or fumbling for documents. This woman seemed almost serene, like she had done this before and knew exactly how it would go. Danny asked for her license and registration in his standard professional tone. The woman nodded and reached slowly into her jacket pocket. That was when everything changed. The evening light caught something on her wrist, a silver bracelet that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. Lisa saw it too, and her hand moved instinctively to her weapon. Danny felt his own pulse quicken. The woman was still moving slowly, carefully, but something about the situation felt wrong to both officers. Lisa drew her weapon and shouted for the woman to show her hands. The command echoed across the empty highway. Danny's hand moved to his own gun, his training taking over even as his mind screamed that something was off about this whole situation. The woman looked confused for a moment, her hand still halfway into her jacket. She started to speak, but Lisa was too amped up now, too scared of that strange bracelet and the woman's unnatural calm. The first shot cracked through the evening air like thunder. Danny fired a second later, his body acting on instinct rather than thought. Both bullets struck the woman's center mass exactly where they had been trained to aim. She stumbled backward from the impact, her body jerking. Danny's stomach dropped and he felt ice flood his veins. What had they just done? Lisa was already reaching for her radio, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. But then the woman straightened up. She looked down at her jacket where 2 bullet holes now marked the leather. She brushed at the fabric with one hand, her expression showing mild annoyance like someone had spilled coffee on her favorite shirt. There was no blood spreading across her clothes. No gasping for breath, no collapse. She just stood there, looking at the 2 officers with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her face suggested. The woman spoke in a calm, measured voice that somehow cut through Danny's panic. She told them that shooting her had been unnecessary. Danny stared at her, his gun still raised but his hands trembling. Lisa had gone completely pale, her weapon lowered but not holstered. The woman sighed and walked back to her car, moving with the same unhurried pace as before. She opened the passenger door and pulled out what looked like a small device. Within minutes, the highway was chaos. Every available unit had responded to Lisa's panicked radio call. Ambulances arrived with their sirens wailing, even though there was clearly no injured person to treat. News helicopters appeared overhead, their cameras recording everything. The woman stood by her car with her arms crossed, waiting patiently while police officers kept their distance and talked frantically into their radios. Captain Jerry Palmer arrived and took control of the scene. He was a veteran with 20 years on the force, and he had never seen anything like this. He approached the woman carefully, trying to keep his voice steady as he asked her to come with them. The woman agreed easily, like she had been expecting this all along. She told them her name was Maya Johnson, and that she supposed this moment had been inevitable. Lisa found her voice and asked the question everyone was thinking. What was she? Maya looked at the young officer with something like sympathy in her eyes. She said she was human, just not from here and not from now. The words hung in the air and nobody knew what to say. Maya pulled out the device she had retrieved from her car. It looked vaguely like a smartphone, but when she activated it, holographic displays appeared in the air around her. The officers watching gasped and stepped back. The displays showed star charts and streams of data that meant nothing to Danny, but looked impossibly advanced. Maya introduced herself properly then, telling them she was Commander Maya Johnson of something called the Temporal Defense Initiative. She explained calmly that she was from approximately 400 years in their future. She had come back because Earth was about to make first contact with an alien species in about 3 weeks. The words sounded insane, but the holographic displays floating in front of them made it hard to dismiss her claims. Jerry felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He told her flatly that what she was saying was impossible. Maya raised an eyebrow and gestured to her bullet-riddled jacket. She pointed out that the bullets they had just fired at her would suggest otherwise. She was equipped with personal shielding technology that was standard issue in her time period. The shields had stopped the bullets completely, dissipating their energy before they could harm her. Maya's expression grew serious then. She told them they needed to talk, all of them, because humanity was not ready for what was coming. She had traveled back through time specifically to help change that. The alien species that would arrive in 3 weeks were called the Valorians, and in her original timeline, the first contact had gone terribly wrong. She was here to make sure that this time, humanity would be prepared to meet them not as frightened children but as equals ready to take their place among the stars. Danny holstered his weapon finally, his hands still shaking. He looked at his partner and saw his own shock reflected in her face. Around them, dozens of officers stood frozen, trying to process what they had just heard. Overhead, the news helicopters continued to circle, recording everything. Maya stood calmly in the center of it all, a woman from the future who had just survived being shot and was now offering to save humanity from a disaster they did not even know was coming. The secure government facility outside Washington sat hidden among rolling hills and thick forests. Maya had been transported there by military helicopter within 6 hours of the highway incident. She sat now in a large conference room surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the country. Military generals in their dress uniforms lined one wall. Scientists from various government agencies occupied another section. Intelligence officials whispered to each other in the back. At the head of the table sat Director Helen Price from the Department of Defense, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had spent her career dealing with threats to national security. Next to her was Dr. Marcus Webb, the nation's leading astrophysicist who looked like he had not slept since receiving the emergency summons. Maya had agreed to complete transparency. She had spent the last few hours answering questions, and now she was ready to show them the truth. She activated her device and holographic images filled the center of the room. The assembled officials leaned forward, their earlier skepticism fading as they watched recordings that could not possibly be faked with current technology. The images showed massive alien vessels descending from space, their hulls reflecting starlight in ways that seemed to defy physics. Maya began explaining her timeline in a clear, steady voice. In her version of history, humanity made first contact on October 24, 2025. A scout ship from something called the Valorian Empire arrived in Earth orbit without warning. The Valorians were explorers and scientists, peaceful by nature but curious about the backwater planet that had just achieved nuclear capability. They wanted to establish communication and share knowledge with the newest species to reach this technological milestone. The holographic recordings continued playing, and the room fell into absolute silence. The images showed beings that were clearly not human but still somehow beautiful. They stood about 8 feet tall with skin that looked like living crystal, refracting light in rainbow patterns that shifted as they moved. Their bodies were humanoid in basic structure, but everything about them screamed alien. The officials watching could not look away from the display. Maya's voice grew heavy as she described what happened next in her original timeline. The first contact went catastrophically wrong. When the Valorian ship appeared over major cities, humanity panicked. World leaders assumed invasion. Military forces across the globe went to maximum alert. Fighter jets scrambled. Nuclear weapons were prepared. The Valorians had tried to broadcast messages of peace, but Earth's communication systems were not compatible with their technology. All humanity saw was enormous alien ships appearing without warning, and they reacted with pure terror. The holographic display shifted to show what came after. Military strikes against the Valorian vessel over New York City. The aliens defending themselves with technology that made Earth's weapons look like toys. Within 6 hours, 17 major cities had been reduced to smoking ruins. 43 million people died before anyone managed to establish communication and negotiate a ceasefire. The images showed destroyed buildings, fires burning across entire city blocks, and scenes of devastation that made several officials in the room close their eyes. Helen leaned forward with her hands clasped tightly on the table. She asked Maya if she was here to prevent that disaster. Maya shook her head slowly. She explained that she was not here to stop the Valorians from coming. Their arrival was what she called a fixed point in spacetime, something that had to happen, but how humanity responded to that arrival could change. In her original timeline, Earth had been frightened children lashing out at something they did not understand. Maya was here to make sure that this time, humanity would meet the Valorians as equals ready for peaceful contact. Dr. Marcus spoke up then, his scientific training making him skeptical despite the evidence before his eyes. He asked how they could know Maya was telling the truth. This could all be an elaborate hoax using technology they did not understand. Maybe she was working for a foreign government, or maybe she was something else entirely, testing their responses. Maya smiled at the question like she had been expecting it. She told them to test her knowledge, to ask her anything about future technology or physics or history, or she could simply show them what she was capable of doing. Maya tapped her device and suddenly every electronic system in the room went dark. The lights cut out. Computer screens went black. Even the backup generators stopped humming. Several officials jumped to their feet in alarm. Then, just as suddenly, everything flickered back to life. Every system restored exactly as it had been before. Maya explained calmly that she had just isolated the entire facility from all external networks, downloaded their complete digital infrastructure, analyzed it, and restored everything in less than 4 seconds. She pointed out that their best hackers could not accomplish that task in 4 months. She asked if they needed more convincing. The room erupted in heated discussion. Some officials argued this proved Maya was a threat, someone with technology that could cripple their entire defense network. Others insisted she was offering them a chance to prepare for something unprecedented. Helen called for order and the room gradually quieted. She asked Maya what exactly she wanted them to do with this information. They had less than 3 weeks before the Valorians arrived according to her timeline. How could they possibly prepare humanity for alien contact in such a short time? Maya stood and walked to the window overlooking the facility grounds. She told them she was not asking them to prepare all of humanity. That would be impossible in the time they had. What she needed was for world leaders to coordinate a unified response. When the Valorian ship appeared, every major nation needed to send the same message of peaceful welcome. No weapons charged, no fighter jets scrambling, just open communication and a willingness to learn. She turned back to face the room and her expression was intense. She told them she had seen both timelines, the one where humanity responded with violence and the one she was trying to create, where they responded with courage. Marcus asked the obvious question that everyone was thinking. What if the Valorians were not actually peaceful? What if Maya was wrong about their intentions? She acknowledged it was a valid concern. In her timeline, the Valorians had only attacked after humanity fired first. They had shown remarkable restraint, actually, only destroying military targets and avoiding civilian casualties when possible. Once communication was established, they had been genuinely horrified by what happened and immediately agreed to a ceasefire. Over the following century, the Valorians became humanity's strongest allies in the galaxy. But that relationship started with the tragedy of first contact, and it took generations to build trust. Helen made a decision then. She told Maya they would convene an emergency meeting with world leaders. The president would need to be briefed immediately. They would need to coordinate with other nations quietly to avoid causing mass panic, and they would need Maya to help them understand everything about Valorian culture and technology that might be relevant. Maya agreed to all of it. She had known this would be difficult, but it was their only chance to change history for the better. The Oval Office felt smaller than usual with so many people crammed inside. President Linda Hayes sat behind the historic desk, while her top advisors filled every available chair. Maya stood near the window, her hands clasped behind her back in a military stance that came naturally after years of service in her timeline. The president had been briefed on everything, but she still looked like someone trying to process information that broke every rule about how the world worked. President Hayes spoke first, her voice measured and careful. She told Maya that what she was asking seemed impossible. Restructuring how humanity thought about its place in the universe in less than 2 weeks went against everything they knew about how societies changed. People needed time to adjust to new ideas. Forcing this kind of paradigm shift could cause panic and chaos. The president's chief of staff nodded in agreement, pointing out that they had no way to control how the public would react to news of alien contact. Maya turned from the window, and her expression was harder than before. She told them bluntly that she was not asking them to be comfortable. She was asking them to grow up. In her timeline, humanity had spent the next century recovering from first contact. Entire generations were traumatized by what happened. Scientific progress was set back decades. The global economy collapsed. Billions of people lived in fear of another alien attack. But humanity had survived and eventually thrived. They built ships capable of crossing galaxies. They formed alliances with 17 different alien species. They became known across their sector of space as brilliant mediators and peacekeepers. She walked across the room and stood directly in front of the president's desk. All of that success, she explained, started with a choice. The choice of whether to meet the Valorians with fear and violence or with curiosity and strength. In her original timeline, humanity chose fear and paid a terrible price. Maya was here to give them the chance to choose differently. The president studied Maya's face for a long moment before asking what exactly she proposed they do. Maya laid out her plan in clear, practical terms. First, they needed to establish communication with other world leaders immediately. China, Russia, the European Union, India, and every other major power needed to be brought into this information. It would require unprecedented cooperation, but the alternative was nuclear war with an alien species that could wipe out humanity without breaking a sweat. Second, they needed to prepare a unified message for when the Valorians arrived, something simple that could be broadcast in multiple languages simultaneously. Welcome. We are humanity, and we are ready to learn. Secretary of State Paul Griffin interrupted to point out the obvious problem with that plan. They had no idea how to communicate with aliens. Maya smiled and pulled out her device. She explained that the Valorians broadcast on quantum frequencies that current Earth technology could not detect or transmit on. However, she had brought communication equipment from her time that could interface with both systems. She could provide the technology needed to make first contact successful. All they had to do was agree to use it and convince other nations to do the same. The National Security Advisor, a man named Charles who had spent his career planning for conventional threats, asked about military preparedness. He wanted to know if they should at least have forces on standby in case things went wrong. Maya's expression darkened. She told them that having military forces on standby was exactly what triggered the disaster in her timeline. The Valorians could detect weapon systems powering up from orbit. When they saw Earth's military going to full alert, they assumed humanity was preparing to attack. That assumption, combined with the actual attacks that followed, created a cycle of violence that killed millions. President Hayes leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. She asked the question that everyone was thinking. What if they did everything Maya suggested and the Valorians still attacked? What if this was all an elaborate trap? Maya's answer was simple and direct. Then she would do everything in her power to protect Earth, including revealing technology from her time that would level the playing field. But she had lived through one timeline already. She knew what the Valorians were capable of, and she knew what they valued. They were not conquerors. They were explorers who genuinely wanted to understand other species. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Finally, the president made her decision. She told her advisors to begin reaching out to other world leaders through secure channels. They would need to move quickly and carefully. The story would leak eventually, but they needed to control the narrative as much as possible. She turned to Maya and asked how long they had to prepare. Maya checked her device and did some quick calculations. 18 days until the Valorian ship entered Earth's solar system. Another 6 hours before it reached orbital position. That gave them just over 2.5 weeks to prepare humanity for the most important moment in its history. Over the next few days, Maya met with world leaders through secure video conferences. The Chinese premier was skeptical, but agreed to cooperate after Maya demonstrated her technology and showed him recordings from her timeline. The Russian president took longer to convince, but eventually came around when Maya pointed out that refusing to cooperate would mean being left out of humanity's first contact with alien life. The European Union Council debated for hours before agreeing unanimously that this was too important to let old rivalries interfere. Maya worked 18-hour days, barely sleeping as she coordinated between different governments and time zones. She provided each nation with the communication technology they would need. She trained their scientists on how to use it. She answered thousands of questions about Valorian culture, biology, and technology. Some questions she could answer easily. Others required her to explain concepts that would not be discovered on Earth for centuries. She did her best to translate advanced physics and xenobiology into terms that current scientists could understand. Danny Cole and Lisa Green were brought to Washington during this time. They had been placed on administrative leave after the shooting, but Maya specifically requested their presence. When they arrived at the secure facility, they were terrified they were going to be prosecuted for shooting a federal agent or something worse. Instead, Maya greeted them warmly and explained that she wanted them to be part of the first contact team. Both officers protested immediately. They had shot her. They were the worst possible choice to represent humanity. Maya's response surprised them both. She told them they had made a mistake born from fear and now they had the chance to do better. That ability, the capacity to learn and change and be better than they were yesterday, was the most human thing possible. The Valorians would respect that. She explained that in Valorian culture, acknowledging mistakes and growing from them was considered a sign of wisdom. Danny and Lisa looked at each other and then slowly nodded their agreement. If Maya thought they could help, they would do whatever she asked. As the days counted down, a plan took shape. When the Valorian ship arrived, 6 nations would broadcast the welcome message simultaneously. The ship designated for the meeting was an aircraft carrier positioned in international waters, representing that this was a meeting for all humanity, not just one nation. Maya would be present along with a carefully selected team of diplomats, scientists, and yes, 2 police officers who had learned that fear could be overcome. Everything was ready. Now they just had to wait and hope that humanity could do what it had never managed before: meet the unknown with open minds instead of raised weapons. The converted military base in Nevada looked ordinary from the outside, but inside it had been transformed into a training facility unlike anything on Earth. Maya had worked with military engineers to recreate what she remembered of Valorian environments. One room was kept at the higher temperature that Valorians preferred. Another had lighting that mimicked the specific spectrum of their home star. A third room contained holographic projections of Valorian cities and landscapes so the team could visualize the culture they were about to encounter. Maya had selected 12 individuals from around the world to form humanity's first contact team. There were diplomats who specialized in cross-cultural communication, scientists who understood xenobiology even if they had never expected to use that knowledge practically, linguists who had studied how language shapes thought and could help bridge the gap between human and alien minds. And there were Danny Cole and Lisa Green, 2 police officers from Portland who represented something Maya thought was important: the ability of ordinary people to rise to extraordinary challenges. The training was intense. Maya started each morning at 6 with what she called cultural orientation. She would project holographic images of Valorians going about their daily lives and explain what each gesture and color shift meant. Valorian skin changed color based on their emotional state, and understanding this was crucial to communication. A shift to deep blue meant sadness or concern. Bright yellow indicated joy or excitement. Red tones suggested anger, but also passion and strong conviction. The team practiced identifying these shifts until they could read Valorian emotions as easily as human facial expressions. Language training came next. Valorian speech used sounds that human vocal cords could not produce naturally, but the translation devices Maya provided would handle that. What mattered was understanding the structure of their language. Valorians did not lie. Their language literally did not have words for deception, because they could detect lies through biochemical analysis of the air around a speaker. Any attempt to deceive them was not just pointless but deeply offensive. Maya drilled this into her team repeatedly. Honesty above all else. If they did not know something, they should say so. If they were afraid, they should admit it. The Valorians would respect that far more than false bravado. Dr. Sophie Martinez was a xenobiologist from Mexico who had spent her career studying extremophile bacteria and theorizing about alien life. Now she was about to meet actual aliens, and she had a million questions. During a break one afternoon, she asked Maya about Valorian biology. How did they eat? What did they breathe? Could they survive on Earth without special equipment? Maya answered each question patiently. Valorians breathed oxygen like humans, but required trace amounts of other gases in specific ratios. They could survive on Earth for short periods, but extended stays would require environmental suits. They consumed energy directly through their crystalline skin, by absorbing specific wavelengths of light. They also consumed certain minerals dissolved in liquid, something like drinking fortified water. The training covered physical interactions too. Valorians had different concepts of personal space than humans. Standing close together during conversation was normal and expected. They also had specific greeting rituals that involved touching foreheads briefly, a gesture that allowed them to sense each other's emotional state more clearly. The team practiced these greetings with each other, feeling awkward at first but gradually becoming comfortable with the movements. Maya spent extra time with Danny and Lisa. She knew they carried guilt about shooting her, and she wanted them to transform that guilt into strength. One evening after the others had gone to their quarters, she sat with both officers in the common area and asked them to tell her exactly what they had been thinking that day on Highway 47. Danny spoke first, his voice quiet. He explained that everything had seemed normal until he saw the strange bracelet and noticed how unnaturally calm Maya appeared. His training said that calm people during traffic stops were either completely innocent or extremely dangerous. He had defaulted to assuming danger. Lisa added that she had been scared. Not rationally, not based on any real threat, but scared because the situation felt wrong in a way she could not explain. Maya listened without judgment and then told them something important. Fear was not shameful. Every sentient species in the galaxy experienced fear. It was a survival mechanism that kept people alive. What mattered was what you did with that fear. Did you let it control you, or did you acknowledge it and act with courage anyway? The Valorians understood this distinction deeply. Their word for courage literally translated as acting despite fear, not acting without fear. As the days passed, the team grew closer. They ate meals together and shared stories about their lives. The Chinese diplomat, a woman named Lin Chen, talked about growing up during her country's rapid modernization and how it felt to watch everything change so quickly. The Russian scientist, a man named Ivan Petrov, shared his love of old science fiction novels and how surreal it felt that he was now living in one. An Indian linguist named Priya Sharma taught everyone basic phrases in 6 different languages, pointing out that linguistic diversity was one of humanity's greatest strengths. They came from different nations and different backgrounds, but they were united in understanding that they represented all of humanity. Maya watched them bond and felt hope growing in her chest. In her original timeline, she had studied the records of first contact and the confused, terrified responses that followed. She had read testimonies from survivors who described the chaos and the horror. She had visited memorials for the millions who died. All of that could be prevented if these 12 people and the world leaders supporting them could just hold their nerve and choose courage over fear. 10 days before the scheduled arrival, Maya gathered the team for what she called a stress test. She had programmed her holographic systems to simulate the Valorian ship arriving. The team stood on a recreation of an aircraft carrier deck, while holographic projections showed an enormous crystalline vessel descending from the sky. The visual was overwhelming, even though they knew it was not real. The ship was massive beyond comprehension, its surface reflecting sunlight in dazzling patterns that hurt to look at directly. Maya watched her team's reactions carefully. Some were awed, some were frightened. All of them stood their ground. She stopped the simulation and asked each person to describe what they felt. The responses varied, but everyone acknowledged some level of fear. Maya nodded approvingly. She told them that fear was the correct response to something so far beyond human experience. The question was whether they could function despite that fear. She ran the simulation again, this time adding the moment when the Valorian landing craft detached from the main ship. Again, the team held steady. They were ready. 5 days out, news of the impending alien contact finally leaked to the press. Despite everyone's best efforts, too many people knew too much. The story broke simultaneously on news networks across the globe. Humanity's first contact with alien life was less than a week away. The public reaction was exactly what they had feared. Panic in some quarters, religious leaders declaring the end times, conspiracy theorists insisting it was all a hoax or a government plot. But there was also excitement and wonder. People gathered in public squares to watch the skies. Scientists who had spent careers arguing that alien life must exist felt vindicated. Children drew pictures of what they imagined the aliens would look like. President Hayes addressed the nation and the world. She confirmed that Earth had received advance warning of an alien arrival through means she could not fully disclose. She emphasized that every indication suggested the aliens were peaceful explorers. She asked for calm and courage. Most importantly, she asked humanity to show the universe what they were truly capable of, coming together in the face of the unknown. Other world leaders echoed similar messages. The tone they struck was careful, acknowledging fear while encouraging hope. Maya watched the news coverage from the Nevada facility. The team gathered around her, seeing the fruits of their preparation playing out across the planet. It was not perfect. There were still military forces on alert in some nations despite agreements otherwise. There were still people buying weapons and hoarding supplies. But overall, humanity was holding together better than it had in her timeline. That had to be enough because, ready or not, the Valorians were coming and there was no stopping it now. 3 days before the Valorian arrival, Maya stood in front of her team for their final comprehensive briefing. The weight of what was about to happen pressed down on everyone in the room. These 12 people, along with the world leaders supporting them, held humanity's future in their hands. Maya had spent weeks preparing them, but now she needed to address the one thing that no amount of training could fully prepare them for: the moment when theory became reality. She began by talking about what made humans special in the galactic community. In her timeline, after the disastrous first contact and the long recovery that followed, humanity had eventually become known for specific qualities. They were adaptable in ways that most species were not. When faced with impossible situations, humans found creative solutions that more rigid civilizations would never consider. They were also emotionally complex. Most species experienced fewer and simpler emotions than humans did. This emotional depth made humans excellent mediators because they could understand multiple perspectives simultaneously. But there was a darker side to human nature that Maya felt obligated to mention. Humans were also capable of extreme violence when threatened. They could convince themselves that atrocities were justified if the alternative seemed worse. The Valorians had learned this the hard way in Maya's original timeline. The aliens had been horrified by how quickly humanity went from first contact to total war. It had taken them years to understand that the violence came from fear rather than inherent aggression. Maya told her team that their job was to show the Valorians humanity's better nature from the very beginning. Danny raised his hand and asked a question that had clearly been bothering him. He wanted to know why Maya had chosen to include him and Lisa on the team at all. They were not diplomats or scientists. They were just cops who had made a terrible mistake. Maya's answer was immediate and heartfelt. She told Danny that he and Lisa represented something crucial. They had acted out of fear and then immediately recognized their mistake. They had felt genuine remorse. Now they were willing to face their fear again and do better. That journey from fear to courage was the story she wanted humanity to tell the Valorians. Lisa spoke up quietly, saying she was still afraid she would mess everything up. Maya smiled and told her that fear was good. Fear meant she understood the stakes. The dangerous people were the ones who thought first contact would be easy. Sophie asked what would happen if, despite all their preparation, the contact still went wrong. What if the Valorians misunderstood something crucial? What if humanity said or did something unforgivably offensive by accident? Maya took a deep breath before answering. She explained that if things went wrong, she would do everything in her power to fix it. She had technology from 400 years in the future, and she was not afraid to use it if Earth's survival depended on it. But she also told them she believed in humanity's capacity to rise to the moment. She had seen it countless times in her own era. Humans facing impossible challenges and somehow finding ways to succeed. The key was being willing to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, and to keep trying even when things got difficult. The Valorians respected those qualities more than they respected perfection. A species that never failed was a species that never took risks worth taking. The team spent the next 2 days in intensive rehearsals. Maya had programmed her holographic systems to simulate different scenarios that might occur during first contact. In one simulation, the Valorian greeting ritual went perfectly and communication proceeded smoothly. In another, technical difficulties prevented the translation devices from working properly, and both sides had to figure out how to communicate through gestures and patience. In a third scenario, one of the team members accidentally said something offensive and had to apologize and explain the misunderstanding. Each simulation taught valuable lessons. The team learned to stay calm under pressure. They practiced reading Valorian body language and color shifts. They developed backup plans for when technology failed. Most importantly, they learned to trust each other and work as a unit. Lin Chen proved to be excellent at reading subtle emotional cues. Ivan had a gift for explaining complex scientific concepts in simple terms. Priya could think on her feet and adapt to changing situations with remarkable speed. Danny and Lisa, despite their lack of diplomatic training, showed a straightforward honesty that the others sometimes lacked. Maya also trained them on Valorian history and culture in greater depth. She explained that Valorian society was organized around something they called the Unity, a form of democratic consensus where major decisions required broad agreement rather than simple majority votes. This made their government stable but slow to change. They valued tradition and careful consideration of consequences. When the Valorians decided to explore a new star system, they spent years studying it from a distance before sending ships. Their arrival at Earth had been planned for decades. The Valorians also had a complex relationship with time. They lived much longer than humans, with natural lifespans exceeding 300 years. This gave them a different perspective on urgency and change. What seemed fast to humans felt rushed to Valorians. Maya warned the team not to expect quick decisions or rapid technological exchange. The Valorians would want to observe and study humanity for years before committing to deeper cooperation. That was normal for them, and humanity needed to respect their pace. On the evening of the final day before the arrival, Maya gave the team time off. She told them to rest, to call their families, to do whatever would help them feel centered and ready. Most of them took her advice. Danny and Lisa walked around the base together, talking about their lives before all this started. Sophie spent hours on video calls with her mother in Mexico City, trying to explain what she was about to do. Lynn meditated in the small garden area that had been set up for her. Ivan read poetry in Russian, finding comfort in familiar words before facing the unknown. Maya found herself alone in the observation room, looking at holographic star charts. She had traveled back through time, survived being shot, convinced world governments to take an impossible risk, and trained a team to represent humanity. She had done everything she could possibly do. Now it came down to whether her faith in humanity was justified. She thought about her own timeline, about the millions who died because fear won over courage. She thought about the world she wanted to create, where that tragedy never happened. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. President Hayes appeared in the doorway. The president had flown in to observe the final preparations. She joined Maya at the holographic display, and they stood together in comfortable silence for a moment. Finally, the president spoke. She thanked Maya for giving humanity this chance. She said that regardless of what happened tomorrow, Maya had already changed history by showing them a better path. Maya appreciated the sentiment, but she knew they would not really succeed until the Valorians departed peacefully. The president asked Maya if she was scared. Maya admitted that she was terrified. She had studied history extensively in her own time, and she knew how many ways this could still go wrong. One misunderstood gesture, one translator malfunction, one nervous soldier firing a weapon despite orders. Any of those things could cascade into disaster. But she also knew that doing nothing would guarantee the disaster she had lived through. This was humanity's chance to choose a better future, and she was grateful to be part of that choice. As midnight approached, marking the final day before contact, Maya sent a message to the entire team. She kept it simple. Tomorrow they would meet representatives of an alien civilization. They would speak for humanity and show the universe what Earth's people were truly capable of. She believed in every one of them. Whatever happened, they should remember that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act rightly despite fear. Humanity had made many mistakes throughout its history, but it had also achieved impossible things. Tomorrow they would achieve something that had only existed in dreams and stories. They would reach out to the stars, and the stars would reach back. October 24, 2025 began with sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. The aircraft carrier USS Enterprise sat in international waters, its deck cleared of fighter jets and instead prepared as a meeting ground. Maya stood at the railing watching the horizon as the sun climbed higher. Around her, the first contact team made final preparations. They wore specially designed uniforms that represented Earth as a whole, rather than any single nation. The fabric incorporated colors and symbols from cultures across the planet. Everyone checked their translation devices one more time, even though they had checked them a dozen times already. The rest of the world watched through cameras positioned around the carrier. Every news network on Earth was broadcasting live. In homes and public squares across the planet, people gathered around screens. Schools had canceled classes. Businesses had closed. This was the single most watched event in human history. Religious leaders of every faith had called for peaceful observation. Scientists provided commentary about what first contact might mean for humanity's understanding of the universe. Everyone had opinions, but nobody really knew what was about to happen. Maya checked the time on her device. According to her calculations, the Valorian ship would enter Earth's atmosphere in approximately 6 hours. She had shared this information with world governments, and they had coordinated their response carefully. Military forces remained at normal readiness levels. Fighter jets were grounded. Weapon systems were powered down. The message was clear. Earth was receiving visitors, not preparing for invasion. It went against every military instinct, but orders had been given, and soldiers around the world were following them. The hours crept by slowly. The team tried to stay occupied. Sophie reviewed her notes on xenobiology. Lynn practiced meditation breathing. Danny and Lisa stood together near the stern, watching the ocean and talking quietly. Ivan paced the deck nervously. Priya hummed an old song from her childhood, finding comfort in familiar melodies. Maya remained calm externally, but inside she was counting down each minute. Everything depended on the next few hours. Either humanity would take its place among the stars, or it would repeat the mistakes of her timeline. At 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, astronomical observatories around the world detected an object entering the solar system at impossible speeds. It was decelerating rapidly, something that should not be possible with known physics. Within minutes, telescopes were tracking it. The object was enormous and moving directly toward Earth. News networks switched from talking heads to live telescope feeds. Everyone watched as the object grew closer, its shape gradually becoming visible against the black of space. It was a ship exactly as Maya had predicted. At 2:47 p.m., the Valorian scout ship entered Earth's atmosphere over the mid-Atlantic. The sky itself seemed to split open as the massive vessel descended. It was approximately 2 miles long, shaped like a teardrop made of crystal. Sunlight struck its surface and scattered in brilliant rainbow displays that could be seen for hundreds of miles. The ship moved slowly and deliberately, clearly visible to everyone below. Maya heard gasps from her team as they saw it for the first time in reality, rather than holographic simulation. No simulation could capture the sheer presence of something so large and so alien hanging in the sky. The ship descended toward the designated meeting point, moving with impossible grace for something so massive. It came to a stop about 500 feet above the ocean surface, hovering without any visible means of propulsion. The carrier looked tiny beneath it. Maya could feel the tension radiating from everyone around her. This was the moment where her timeline had diverged catastrophically from what she hoped would happen now. In her original history, fighter jets had scrambled the moment the ship appeared. Missiles had been launched within minutes. Here and now, the sky remained clear except for the alien vessel. Humanity was holding its nerve, a smaller craft detached from the bottom of the main ship. It was still large by human standards, roughly the size of a school bus, but manageable compared to the mothership looming above. The smaller craft descended smoothly toward the carrier's flight deck. Maya signaled for the team to take their positions. They had practiced this moment dozens of times, but practice felt nothing like reality. Sophie was breathing hard, clearly fighting to stay calm. Lynn's meditation training served her well as she maintained perfect composure. Danny's hand kept moving toward his hip where his service weapon would normally be, a habit he had to consciously suppress. The Valorian craft touched down gently on the deck. For a moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then a hatch opened in the side of the craft and 3 figures emerged. Maya felt her heart racing as she saw them. Valorians in person were even more striking than the holographic recordings had suggested. They stood approximately 8 feet tall with bodies that were humanoid in basic structure, but clearly adapted for different gravity and environmental conditions. Their skin was the most remarkable feature, looking like living opal that shifted through colors as they moved. It was not quite translucent, but light seemed to pass through the outer layers, creating depth and movement in their appearance. The 3 Valorians wore simple robes of a material that looked like woven starlight. They moved with fluid grace down the ramp from their craft. Maya could see their eyes scanning the assembled humans, large and multifaceted like gemstones, taking in everything. The lead Valorian's skin was cycling through colors that Maya recognized as curiosity and cautious optimism. That was a good sign. The Valorian was interested and hopeful rather than fearful or aggressive. Maya stepped forward as planned. She was the designated first contact specialist, the one who would initiate communication. She could feel millions or perhaps billions of eyes watching through cameras, but she pushed that awareness aside. Right now, there was only her and the Valorian commander and the choice that would determine humanity's future. She activated her translation device and spoke clearly. She welcomed the Valorians to Earth and introduced herself as Commander Maya Johnson, speaking on behalf of the people of this planet. The lead Valorian's skin shifted rapidly through a spectrum of colors. Maya recognized surprise, then intense curiosity, then something like recognition. The Valorian stepped closer, and when it spoke, its voice was melodic, almost like singing. The translation device rendered the words into English after a brief delay. The Valorian introduced itself as Crystalline Commander Viel of the Valorian Exploration Fleet. They came seeking knowledge and friendship. They had observed this system for many cycles and were pleased to finally meet the species that called the third planet home. Then Viel did something unexpected. The Valorian's large eyes focused directly on Maya, and its skin color shifted to a deep purple that Maya did not recognize from her studies. Viel spoke again, and this time there was wonder in its translated voice. The Valorian said that Maya was not of this time. She carried the signature of temporal displacement. The Valorian wanted to know how and why a human from a future era had come back to this moment. The entire team froze. President Hayes, watching from the secure command center, felt her stomach drop. This was not part of any scenario they had prepared for. Maya made a split-second decision. The Valorians valued honesty above all else. Trying to hide the truth would be worse than revealing it. She confirmed that Vale was correct. She explained that she was from approximately 400 years in their future. She had traveled back through time because in her original timeline, this first contact had gone catastrophically wrong. She came back to ensure that this meeting would be peaceful instead of violent, that humanity would greet the Valorians as friends rather than attacking them out of fear. Vale's skin rippled through colors that Maya recognized as fascination and deep approval. The Valorian stepped even closer and performed a gesture, placing a three-fingered hand over the center of its chest. Maya recognized it as a sign of profound respect. Vale spoke, and the translation conveyed emotion that the words alone could not capture. The Valorian said that Maya had risked everything to save her people from tragedy. She had violated fundamental laws of time and space to give humanity a chance at a better future. In Valorian culture, such sacrifice was held in the highest regard. It demonstrated wisdom, courage, and love for one's people. These were the qualities that the Valorians valued most in any species. The other two Valorians moved forward and performed the same gesture as their commander, hands over their chests in a sign of deep respect. Maya felt something release inside her chest. The moment she had feared most, the revelation of her temporal displacement, had actually worked in humanity's favor. She had gambled on Valorian values and won, but there was still so much that could go wrong. They had made it past the first hurdle, but first contact was far from complete. Vale spoke again and asked if there were other humans who wished to participate in this historic meeting. Maya gestured for her team to come forward. One by one, they approached and introduced themselves. Lin Chen bowed slightly in traditional Chinese fashion, and then performed the Valorian gesture of respect, hand over heart. Vale's skin shifted to warm gold tones that Maya recognized as pleasure and approval. Ivan Petrov stepped forward and stumbled slightly over the Valorian pronunciation of his greeting, but he said it with such earnest effort that all three Valorians rippled with colors indicating amusement and appreciation. When Danny Cole and Lisa Green stepped forward together, Maya felt her breath catch. This was the true test. She had explained to Val that these two humans had initially responded to her appearance with violence born from fear. Val studied both officers with those large, multifaceted eyes. Danny found his voice and spoke carefully through the translation device. He told Viel that he had made a terrible mistake when he first encountered Commander Maya Johnson. He had acted from fear and fired his weapon at her. He deeply regretted his actions and had spent the time since then learning to respond to fear with courage, instead of violence. Lisa added that she too had fired at Maya and that it remained the worst moment of her life. But Maya had shown them both forgiveness and had given them the opportunity to be part of something greater than themselves. They stood before Vael, now asking for the same forgiveness from the Valorian people. Maya watched Vael's skin carefully, trying to read the rapid color shifts. There was blue, indicating consideration and seriousness. There was silver, a color she had not seen before. Then Vael's skin settled into a steady lavender shade. Vael spoke, and the translation carried weight that seemed to transcend language. The Valorians said that in their culture, acknowledging mistakes was considered the first step toward wisdom. Any species that could not admit its errors could not learn from them. Danny and Lisa had acted from fear, and then immediately recognized that their fear had led them astray. They had worked to become better. This demonstrated the capacity for growth that the Valorians looked for when evaluating other species. Vael told both officers that no forgiveness was necessary because they had already done the hardest work of forgiving themselves and choosing to change. President Hayes spoke then through the communication system that connected the carrier to command centers around the world. Her voice was transmitted to the flight deck, and the translation device rendered it into Valorian. She introduced herself as the leader of one of Earth's major nations and welcomed Vael on behalf of all humanity. She explained that Earth was home to many different cultures and governments, but that they had all agreed to meet the Valorians with open minds and peaceful intentions. She asked what the Valorians hoped to gain from contact with humanity. Vael's response was thoughtful and detailed. The Valorian explained that their species had been exploring the galaxy for thousands of years by Earth's measure. They had encountered 147 different sentient species during that time. Each species was unique, with its own perspective on existence and its own contributions to the galaxy's diversity of thought and culture. The Valorians believed that knowledge shared between species benefited everyone. They wanted to learn about human culture, science, art, and philosophy. In return, they would share their own knowledge freely. Sophie stepped forward with a question that had been burning in her mind since she first learned about the Valorians. She asked what other species in the galaxy were like. Were they all similar to Valorians and humans, or were there truly alien forms of life? Vael's skin rippled with colors indicating enthusiasm for the question. The Valorian explained that life took countless forms across the stars. There were species that lived in the crushing pressure of gas giant atmospheres. There were beings made of what humans would call energy rather than matter. There were collective consciousnesses where millions of individuals shared a single mind. The diversity was staggering and wonderful, but Vael also delivered a warning that made everyone listening feel the weight of reality. The galaxy was not uniformly peaceful. There were species that viewed other sentient beings as resources to be exploited or threats to be eliminated. There were empires that expanded through conquest. There were pirates and raiders who preyed on weaker civilizations. By making contact with the Valorians, humanity had announced its presence to this larger galactic community. Not everyone who eventually came to Earth would come with peaceful intentions. Humanity needed to be aware of this reality and prepare accordingly. The news sent a ripple of alarm through the human observers. Maya had not fully explained this aspect of galactic politics during her preparations. President Hayes asked directly if Earth was now in danger. Vael's response was measured and honest. Danger was relative. Yes, there were hostile forces in the galaxy, but Earth was located in what the Valorians considered a backwater region, far from the major trade routes and political centers. It would take time before more dangerous species even became aware that humans existed, and the Valorians would not abandon a species they had made contact with. If threats emerged, the Valorian Empire would stand with Earth and help humanity defend itself. Lynn asked about the Valorian Empire itself. How was it governed? What were its values? What would be expected of humanity if they formed an alliance? Vael seemed pleased by the question. The Valorian explained that their empire was not an empire in the human sense of the word. It was a voluntary association of species who had agreed to mutual defense and knowledge sharing. Each member species governed itself according to its own traditions. The only requirement was adherence to basic principles. No member could wage aggressive war against another member. No member could engage in slavery or genocide, and all members had to contribute to the shared defense when major threats emerged. Beyond those basics, species were free to organize themselves however they wished. Yvonne asked a technical question about faster-than-light travel. How did the Valorian ships cross such vast distances? Vial's skin shifted to colors indicating that this was a complex topic. The Valorian tried to explain in terms that humans could understand. Their ships did not actually travel faster than light. Instead, they manipulated the structure of space itself, creating shortcuts through dimensions that humans had not yet discovered mathematically. It was not easy technology and it required enormous amounts of energy, but it made travel between stars practical rather than taking centuries. As the questions and answers continued, Maya watched the interaction carefully. This was going better than she had dared hope. The Valorians were patient with human curiosity. Her team was asking intelligent questions and representing humanity well. President Hayes and other world leaders were maintaining the diplomatic tone they had agreed upon. Nobody had panicked. Nobody had reached for weapons. The disaster of her original timeline felt like it was happening in another universe rather than being a real possibility that she had narrowly averted. But then Priya asked the question that made everyone tense. She wanted to know what had happened in Maya's original timeline. What specifically went wrong that caused the tragedy Maya had traveled back in time to prevent? Vial looked at Maya, and she could read the question in the Valorian's posture. Was she willing to discuss this? Maya nodded slowly. The truth should be known even if it was painful. Maya explained in careful detail what had happened in her original history. The Valorian ship had appeared without warning because she had not been there to provide advance notice. Human military forces had assumed invasion. Fighter jets were scrambled. Missiles were launched. The Valorians had defended themselves, destroying the weapons that threatened their ship. Human leaders had interpreted this as an attack and escalated further. Nuclear weapons were prepared. In the chaos and fear, 17 cities were destroyed before anyone managed to establish communication. 43 million people died in 6 hours. It took a century for humanity to recover from the trauma. The silence that followed her explanation was profound. Vial's skin had shifted to deep blue, the color of sadness and regret. The Valorian spoke quietly and the translation conveyed genuine sorrow. Vial said that the Valorians had encountered similar situations with other species. Fear of the unknown was a common reaction among young civilizations, but never before had they experienced such catastrophic escalation. They would have done things differently if they had understood how fragile the situation was. The tragedy was that both species had acted according to their natures, and both had suffered for it. Maya told Vial that was exactly why she had taken the risk of traveling back through time. Both species deserved a better first meeting. The first meeting between humans and Valorians lasted 6 hours. When Vial and the other 2 Valorians finally returned to their ship, they promised to return the following day to continue discussions. The massive crystalline vessel ascended slowly and moved to a stable orbit around Earth where it would remain as a symbol of the new relationship between species. Maya stood on the carrier deck watching it go and felt tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had actually changed history. The disaster of her original timeline would never happen now. The weeks and months that followed transformed human civilization in ways both subtle and profound. The Valorians did not overwhelm Earth with advanced technology or try to reshape human society. Instead, they established what they called an embassy, though it was unlike any embassy in human history. They constructed a floating platform in international waters, a structure that used Valorian technology to remain stable in any weather. The platform became a place where humans and Valorians could meet and learn from each other on neutral ground that belonged to no single nation. Technology transfer began slowly and carefully. Vial had explained that giving too much technology too quickly to a developing species usually caused more harm than good. Societies needed time to adapt. But there were certain technologies that could be shared immediately because they would clearly benefit humanity without destabilizing existing systems. The Valorians shared medical knowledge that led to cures for dozens of diseases that had plagued humans for generations. Cancer, which had killed millions, became a treatable condition. Genetic disorders could be corrected. Regenerative medicine became possible in ways that human science would not have achieved for another century. Energy technology was another area where the Valorians helped immediately. They showed human engineers how to build fusion reactors that were safe, efficient, and clean. Within 6 months, the first human-built fusion plant came online in Iceland. It produced more energy than the entire nation needed with zero carbon emissions and minimal waste. Plans were already underway to build similar plants across the world. The fossil fuel era was ending and humanity was transitioning to clean energy far faster than anyone had thought possible. But perhaps the most important gift the Valorians offered was perspective. Humans began to understand that they were part of something larger than their own planet. The petty conflicts and divisions that had seemed so important started to feel small when viewed against the backdrop of galactic civilization. Nations that had been rivals for centuries found themselves cooperating on projects related to space exploration and first contact protocols. The United Nations underwent massive restructuring to create frameworks for dealing with interspecies relations. Maya's role evolved as the initial crisis passed. She was no longer preparing humanity for disaster, but helping guide them through the complex process of joining galactic society. She worked with the Valorians to establish educational programs that would teach humans about alien cultures and prepare them for eventual contact with other species. She advised governments on policy questions that no human had ever had to consider before. And she continued working with Danny Cole and Lisa Green, who had become ambassadors in their own right. Danny and Lisa's story had captured public imagination. The two police officers who shot an alien time traveler and then became instrumental in successful first contact became symbols of humanity's capacity for growth and redemption. They traveled the world speaking to groups about overcoming fear and choosing understanding over violence. They talked about their mistake honestly and openly, never trying to minimize what they had done but also showing how people could learn and become better. Young people especially responded to their message that making mistakes did not define you as long as you were willing to change. 6 months after first contact, President Hayes stood with Maya watching something that would have been impossible before the Valorians arrived. The first human spacecraft capable of interstellar travel was undergoing final preparations for its maiden voyage. It had been built in orbit using a combination of human engineering and Valorian guidance. The ship was not as advanced as Valorian vessels, but it was functional, and it was entirely human-made. A crew of 12, including Sophie Martinez, would take it on a short journey to a nearby star system to test its systems and demonstrate that humanity could now travel beyond its own solar system. The president asked Maya a question that had been on her mind for months. What would Maya do now? Would she return to her own time, or would she stay in this new timeline she had created? Maya smiled as she answered. In her original timeline, she had studied temporal mechanics and devoted her life to understanding how history unfolded. But she had always regretted that she was born too late to see humanity's first steps into the galaxy. She had missed the wonder and excitement of that era. Now she had a chance to experience it firsthand. She told the president that if it was acceptable, she would like to stay and see what she had helped create. President Hayes laughed and told Maya that Earth would be honored to have her stay as long as she wished. The president then shared news that Maya had not heard yet. The Valorians had transmitted a message earlier that morning. The Galactic Federation, a council of sentient species, wanted to meet with Earth representatives. They had been observing how humanity handled first contact, and they were impressed. Species that managed peaceful first contact were rare enough that the Federation always took notice. The Federation was extending an invitation for Earth to send ambassadors to their next council meeting. Maya felt pride swell in her chest. This was happening even faster than she had dared hope. The Federation meeting would be crucial for establishing Earth's place in galactic society. She asked who would be sent as ambassadors. The president smiled and told her that the choice was obvious. The team that handled first contact would represent Earth at the Federation meeting. That meant Maya, Lynn, Ivan, Priya, Sophie, Danny, Lisa, and the others would be Earth's first voices in the larger galactic community. It was a responsibility beyond anything any human had held before, but they had proven they could handle it. As they watched the interstellar ship complete its pre-flight checks, Dr. Sophie Martinez contacted them from the ship. She was barely containing her excitement as she reported that all systems were functioning perfectly. The crew was ready. In 30 minutes, they would engage the space manipulation drive and make the jump to another star system. They would be gone for 2 weeks, but when they returned, humanity would have officially become a spacefaring species capable of traveling between stars. Sophie thanked Maya for making this moment possible, and Maya felt tears prick her eyes again. The launch went perfectly. One moment the ship was visible in orbit around Earth. The next moment it simply vanished as the drive created a shortcut through space. It would reappear 13 light-years away near a star system that the Valorians had confirmed was uninhabited. Sophie and her crew would study the system, test all their equipment, and then return home with data that would inform the next generation of human starships. Maya watched the space where the ship had been and felt satisfaction deeper than anything she had experienced in her long life. Danny and Lisa joined Maya and the president on the observation deck. The four of them stood together watching Earth turn slowly below them. Danny spoke quietly about how strange it was that everything had started with a routine traffic stop on Highway 47. He had been doing his job exactly as he had been trained. Then he made a mistake that could have ended in tragedy. Instead, that mistake had become the spark that lit humanity's path to the stars. He still thought about that moment every day, but now when he remembered it, he felt hope rather than shame. Lisa added that she had learned something important from the experience. Fear was not the enemy. Fear was natural and sometimes appropriate. The enemy was letting fear control your actions instead of acknowledging it, and then choosing to act with courage anyway. The Valorians understood that distinction, and now humanity was learning it too. She thought that was maybe the most important lesson from first contact, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act rightly despite it. Maya looked at both of them with genuine affection. She told them they had grown tremendously since that day on the highway. They had taken their mistake and transformed it into wisdom that they now shared with others. That ability to learn and change was what made humans special. Most species eventually learned and grew, but humans seemed to do it faster and more thoroughly than almost anyone else. That quality would serve humanity well in the years to come, because joining galactic society would bring constant challenges and opportunities for growth. The president asked Maya about the future. In her original timeline, what had humanity achieved after recovering from the disastrous first contact? Maya thought about how to answer. She explained that in her timeline, humanity had struggled for a century but then began to thrive. They built ships that could cross the galaxy. They formed alliances with 17 different species. They became known as brilliant mediators who could help resolve conflicts that other species could not.